When one looks carefully at the words and expressions and teachings to be found in the pastoral epistles, those written by the elder to the younger, Paul to Timothy and to Titus, one sees the embryonic life of the church. One sees already in place certain things that by now are standard. We see how he wants, for instance, prayers to be offered up for certain categories of people, and so they are. I remember when an altar boy in school days, at the end of the High Mass, we had in Latin the chant for the Queen, and in France that would be Salvam fac rem publicam, God save the Republic. In different countries, therefore, there was that praying for authority, and one has to respect authority within the parameters that are legitimate. We find also that there is an invitation to raise up holy hands. That is the orante position that we find in images in the catacombs. They're outstretched. And at La Trappe, at the Our Father at Vespers, the abbot wanted us to have the orante position. The whole community in mode of impetration, using the very words of the Saviour in chant, and the Our Father was well chanted in French, quite often in harmony. The orante position is still in our liturgy, although it became vestigial for centuries. The rubrics of the Mass of 1570 indicate that the arms are in this position for the celebrant, that is, they weren't to be surpassing the shoulders. That's vestigial. The renewal has brought back the fullness, the amplitude of gesture. In the Carthusian rite, they were never vestigial. It is a simple rite, but it is a testimony of antiquity. And to this day, the celebrant has his arms fully outstretched for the whole canon, reproducing the cross, therefore. It's fully outstretched, which is quite tiring if he's using the long canon. That's the Carthusian rite. One studies a rite and one sees how the Church thinks in centuries. One develops spontaneously and slowly, not violently, from the old. Specifically in the Carthusian rite, one sees points of intermediary development, notably the question of the elevation. In antiquity, the real elevation would be that which we have still, in its present form at least, at the end of the Eucharistic prayer. Hence the importance now of it being sung, and in France it was quite often sung in harmony and very well, by about 50 concelebrants or so. It's quite beautiful. And the stage of the Tridentine rite has actually a broken doxology insofar as there is the uncovering of the chalice, the genuflection, and then the elevation of both host and chalice. And it's only that bit that is actually audible, per omnia saecula saeculorum. Well, that whatever its form over the centuries would have been the old culmination, the doxology, the elevation therefore. But at a certain point in time, a need was felt to indicate that the presence was there immediately after the consecration as a counterbalance against certain people who wanted to deny that, and indicating the full force of the words of consecration, which of course for centuries were shorter than they are at present. Hoc est corpus meum. And classically at that point there would have been a genuflection. The priest would genuflect, and he still does so in the Tridentine rite immediately afterwards, while still holding actually the host. But then, centuries ago, was added a visible elevation afterwards, and spontaneously one felt the need to add again a genuflection, so that had a doubling up of genuflections. Now the Carthusian rite is old, and in the old orders one sees what preceded the genuflection, the profound bow. There are no genuflections in the Carthusian rite, or classically actually in the Cistercian rite. They're both ancient orders. The genuflection as we know it came in bit by bit as a result probably of the difficulty of crusaders with regard to bowing profoundly when they had armour on, and therefore the way of doing it by genuflecting came in and was found to be very useful and popular, and it crept in also in the liturgical sphere, it would seem, and became the norm. But to this day, at the elevation in the Carthusian rite, the elevation of the host, the celebrant bows profoundly, and classically the community prostrates itself on that part of the body, slightly on one side, the elbow prostration. Now, the elevation of the chalice came in spontaneously bit by bit, but it hadn't come in when the Carthusians came into existence. There is no elevation of the chalice in the Carthusian rite. The priest consecrates with the chalice uncovered from the corporal, because the corporal covers the chalice in the Carthusian rite. It's folded over. So the consecration happens with the chalice slightly elevated, and there's a tiny elevation, but it's not seen by anyone, put down immediately, and the corporal is then put over it again. And he makes again a profound bow. But classically the community would be on its elbows already at that point. They would not see anything. In the Tridentine rite, the elevation of the chalice has come in, and again one can see the remnant of what was there before, insofar as there is an immediate genuflection after the words of consecration, which still contain, of course, those words Mysterium Fidei, which seem to have crept in. It probably would have been said by a deacon to indicate to the people that this was the high moment, this is the mystery of faith. It was removed at the Reform in 1969, or even probably coming in bit by bit earlier, and replaced by the acclamation of the people, which rightly should be solemn and sung. These quickies are not helpful. And then the elevation of the chalice did come in, and spontaneously the second genuflection came in as well, which leads therefore to 4 genuflections at the consecration. And we have also the way in which, in the Tridentine rite specifically, the various families of liturgy were all respected. What the Council Fathers did was not to abolish, but to standardize and make uniform, although respecting rites which had more than 200 years of existence, like the Carthusian rite, Cistercian rite, Dominican rite, and others, Carmelites too. And by the way, we had that still when I was studying, living with the Carmelites there, when I was studying classics in Aberystwyth, they still had that for the prayer supplices at the canon. Whereas in the Roman rite it's that. And also with regard to the Carthusian rite, they had one difference with regard to the way that they observed not touching anything after the consecration with those two fingers, but they only had them joined when they were about to touch something else. So at the extension of the hands, even after the consecration, the hands were like that and not like that. But they came together when they had to touch something. With regard then to what the Council of Trent did, it respected all it found, which meant that therefore they had the different families still being maintained, but alongside each other and commingled, which therefore explains that the signs of the cross that they found, the beginnings of the Mass that they found, the confessions that they found, the various prayers that they found, private prayers of priests and so on, were maintained. But therefore they were maintaining what was unique in each rite, but doubling and tripling it when it came to putting them together in the Roman rite. And therefore one had very many signs of the cross, very many prayers having the same purpose. And this was what the Council Fathers were looking at when they wanted, in the expression of Paul VI, that the purity of lines of the architectural structure of liturgy should be seen again. What we would commonly refer to as uncluttering. Now that's not disrespectful, it's just trying to see what had happened. It's natural, spontaneous growth over centuries which has become very heavy. And one had extremes such as the numbers of prayers that might be added at the collect. The maximum that one could get to at one point in history, before the changes that started under John the 23rd, were 7. You could have 7. Now, on an ordinary Sunday there would be 3, and that meant 3 collects, 3 secrets, and 3 post-communions, because each had to counterbalance. So it was all interesting, but it was the fruit of growth. Therefore, the need to prune was felt. Just to understand where the Council Fathers were coming from, it was not an itch to destroy, to dismantle, to put a bulldozer through and recreate something new. The thought in the minds of the Council Fathers was to see again the beauty of the thrust of the liturgy in its natural dynamic. And by reducing the number of vocal prayers, to improve the interiority of the prayer itself. And it's interesting to note that Paul VI did comment after the Second Vatican Council in public that that had happened, he did recognize it, but that other things had come in too, and he attacked them. He saw what was going on. A hijacking was taking place, which was not of the Holy Ghost. In Ireland, and in some places, one didn't benefit from the fullness of reform, really, because what happened was, as people commented, what came out was quite often more of the same thing. That is, the accustomed speed which celebrants had got into, quite often because they had to have the altar vacant for the next celebration after half an hour. therefore speed came in, but that speed was maintained even in English when the number of prayers was reduced, when there was no need to. It was the speed also that one saw in the Rosary. So that was not liturgical renewal at all. In France, in Germany, and other countries where liturgical renewal had been worked in depth upon for years, a very strong reaction came in with regard to what we would call the quickie. Priests became unwilling to celebrate more than once or twice on a given day, but the celebrations from Saturday evening to Sunday evening would be fully sung, always an hour long, with a long homily. Because in France, at least, the tradition of oration was still there, and people were still well formed in seminaries for a long time. They wouldn't get away with just a few thoughts. People expected more. So that leaves us with vestiges and natural evolution, what Alcuin Reid has referred to as the organic development. And Pope Benedict wasn't happy about the way in which a positivist notion of being able to fabricate ex novo came in suddenly out of the blue. It wasn't the mandate given to the concilium, the body that was implementing the renewal. They, bit by bit, went into an aggressively new mode of attack. Now, in the interim period, chaos started to come in, and Paul VI asked the concilium to get its work concluded, because without having an official mass, a period of experimentation had come in, and it was very damaging for the unity of the Church. Actually, say what you like, on paper, the missal in its editio typica that came in 1969 does, on paper, if one looks carefully at each of the rubrics, have a notion of continuity with the past, if one knows where these rubrics are coming from. And one can celebrate it in that continuity, if one wants to. But people don't seem to want to. So the problem is on the level of the people and the application. And what has happened is, as a result of that abuse, and quite often desecration, people have overreacted and have refused the whole lot. And one gets quite often people who will not at all assist at the ordinary form. Again, this in part was addressed by the supreme authority of the Church in the repeated request that the abuses be checked. And Pope Francis himself has recognized that there is a problem on the level of the application which has led to the overreaction. So the correct way is to look at the real problem, because what happens otherwise is that one goes into taking refuge in what was there before any changes at all, exclusively. And that can lead to essentially entrenchment and camp warfare, which is not healthy either for the life of the Church. One sees that in a place where the contemplative life is strong and well lived, the application spontaneously is under the Holy Ghost, and abuses don't come in the same way, because one is loving the Lord and handling him with that love at the altar, and this friend is able to teach what is pleasing in his service. So I remember being pleasantly surprised to see how even after the council, both in our own parish and in the house that was looking after the parish at a distance, Ampleforth Abbey, there was a calm application without any massive rupture. So we need to look at the real problem, its interiority. if that isn't there, catastrophe was bound to follow. With regard to the gospel of this day, it also is liturgical in mode. That prayer of the centurion, who surely was a very good man, humble, generous, wanting to spare the Lord the embarrassment of coming into a pagan home, and full of faith, that prayer came into the liturgical sphere and has remained with us. In Welsh, actually, and in German, they maintained the full scriptural text. Under my roof, unter my dach, dan fy nhw in Welsh. It's been restored now in the English that we have. And my soul shall be healed has been restored. It was always there in the Welsh. We do well to keep the scriptural prayers in their fullness. But it is a moment in which we repeat with humility that faith-filled prayer of the centurion, and looking at the host, we plead for forgiveness. What last time before daring to receive it? For we are not worthy to receive the Lord under the roof of our body and soul. And so it is that we have in our hands the same as our fathers, and we need to have the same respect for the same. One of the tragedies is that even though we have exactly the same grace in our hands, we go away, it would seem, with far grace less in our souls than before, because we don't correspond or give it a chance to operate. This question of talking immediately after receiving Holy Communion, either even actually giving notices and making people laugh and applauding in church, or talking to one another afterwards in sacristy and in church while the presence is still there in our hearts, is also an abuse. And there again it shows where the problem is. Have we understood what we are doing? I remember that the first sermon I had to preach in Rome when doing homiletics was on the gospel of this day. And I did insist on the fact that we are looking at the same Lord, and that prayer is very important. In the old rite, there are points when the celebrant has to look at the host while saying the prayers, and this is one of them. Looking straight at the Lord that one is about to receive while saying those prayers, which are not heard by the people. They are moments of intimacy. Now, in the old rite, as in the Carthusian rite, the silence that enshrouds the Eucharistic prayer is a privileged moment of intimacy. The Church, on the deepest level of its liturgical daily prayer, the Mass itself, has, in the interests of participation in every word, in comprehensibility, lost, unfortunately, the mystique of complete isolation in God for the celebrant, who, by being so united to the Lord at that point, is able to give his parish and people an element of contemplation and contact, which perhaps they need more than many words and much humanity. A priest who is completely alone with the angels in silence, hearing the cosmic power of the words that he alone can hear at the consecration, and looking straight into the eyes of the Lord before him for a long time, is someone who is in a privileged situation, like Moses on the mountain, or Elijah hearing the still small voice. If we don't have leaders, priests and bishops who are in some way souls of intimacy with Jesus, because they are exposed in a powerful eye-to-eye encounter with him every day with nothing in between, then as a body, the church is impoverished. Because what is going to happen, and is happening, is that we are guided by great communicators, great DJs, great administrators. Is the church enriched by being guided by great administrators? One can look over our shoulder and one can see another pattern, the Eastern Church. There, the parish priest is not given a parish unless actually he has his presbytera, his wife who has to live very stringent rules, but then he will never become anything but a parish priest. On the other hand, the bishop is always from the non-married clergy. Therefore, all the bishops practically come from the contemplative atmosphere of very strict monasteries. And in the East, therefore, they don't even dream of DJs in church. They don't even dream of touching the sacred deposit of divine liturgy, rightly called. It's just untouchable. A different mode. The East, yes, it may be a bit more chaotic in some things, but when it comes to honouring God, they don't suffer from the itch of modernism quite as much as we do. And maybe many of the bishops are not as great as administrators as ours, but boy, do their beards mean business when it comes to God.